27 years have passed, yet the echoes of one summer afternoon in Arizona still linger. A little girl vanished in broad daylight from her own front yard. A town frozen in fear, a nation searching for answers. How could something so dark give birth to something so unbreakable? Some wounds fade with time, others become the very reason we survive. This is the story of Madison Grant and the miracle that never stopped haunting Prescott Valley. July 15, 1998. Prescott Valley, Arizona was the kind of town where summer afternoons lasted forever under a merciless sky. The lawns fought against desert heat, streets stayed quiet except for occasional pickup trucks, and children's laughter drifted through screen doors. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. That Wednesday, the West family's house on Sagebrush Drive baked in drowsy heat. Madison, a 3-year-old girl with honey blonde curls and a gap-toothed smile, sat on the front step beside her 5-year-old brother Connor. Both had sticky fingers from cherry popsicles. It was the last week before Connor's first day of real school. Their mother Megan folded laundry inside while their father Tyler watched from the porch, smiling at his children. Just before 2 o'clock, Tyler went inside for another popsicle. He left the screen door ajar. His children were right there, visible through the mesh. He was gone less than 2 minutes. When he stepped back outside, Connor stood frozen at the driveway's edge, staring down the empty street. Madison's pink tricycle lay tipped on its side, one wheel still turning. But Madison was gone. Tyler's throat closed. "Madison?" Connor pointed down the street, face drained of color. Tyler ran, bare feet slapping concrete. "Madison!" The name echoed off houses. He reached the corner. Nothing moved except heat shimmer. His chest tightened. She was just here. Behind him, Megan's scream split the afternoon. Neighbors poured from homes. Questions flew. Nobody had seen anything. In that brutal sun, a 3-year-old girl had simply vanished. The first deputy arrived 12 minutes later. More cars came. The street became a parking lot of flashing lights. Deputies knocked on every door. Same questions, same useless answers. One neighbor mentioned a dark truck driving slow near the corner, but she couldn't be sure. This was Prescott Valley. Nothing bad happened here. By evening, volunteers swarmed. Hundreds walked through scrubland, calling her name. Helicopters circled overhead. Madison's preschool photo flashed across television screens. Pink dress with strawberries. Gap-toothed smile. Every parent watching felt their heart stop. But here's what nobody knew yet. The nightmare had only just begun. Night fell. Dogs sniffed the driveway, followed a scent 15 yards, then lost it completely. The handler shook his head. "Trail ends here." Tyler refused to go inside. He stood in the yard all night. Megan clutched Madison's stuffed rabbit by the window. Searches continued through darkness, but the desert gave nothing back. Just silence. Day 2 arrived with brutal sunshine. Heat climbed past 110 degrees. Volunteers searched hiking trails, abandoned buildings, dry creek beds. Nothing. Tips poured in, hundreds of them, none helpful. By afternoon, the reality everyone feared settled in. A 3-year-old couldn't survive this heat without water, but nobody said it out loud. Sheriff Blake Anderson held a press conference. "We're doing everything we can." His eyes told a different story. Day 3 brought monsoon clouds, but no rain. Search parties thinned. The command post started packing. Madison's poster hung everywhere, but people stopped looking. They'd already mourned her. Day 4, the active search scaled down. After this long and desert heat, the word survival felt like a cruel joke. Day 5, July 20th, 1998. 45 miles north near Flagstaff, a retired couple hiking stopped at an abandoned outhouse on a forgotten forest road. Harold approached the weathered structure, heard something, stopped. Wind through pines. He took another step, heard it again, a sound coming from below. He dropped to his knees, peered into the pit's darkness, called out, "Hello?" Silence, then barely audible, "Help!" His blood turned to ice. They shone a flashlight down 15 feet. There, pressed against the wall, covered in filth, was a child. Alive. Harold sprinted for his CB radio, hands shaking. There's a child in the outhouse. She's alive. Within an hour, emergency responders swarmed the forest. Nobody could believe it. A child? Alive? After 5 days, a young firefighter was lowered down on ropes. "I've got her." She's breathing. When he emerged carrying a small body wrapped in his jacket, everyone stopped breathing. Gray skin, matted hair, chemical burns covering her legs. But her eyes were open. A paramedic recognized her instantly. "That's Madison Grant." Nobody moved. They just witnessed the impossible. She was rushed to Flagstaff Medical Center. Doctors swarmed her. Minutes from kidney failure. Chemical burns had eaten through skin. Dehydration should have killed her, but didn't. Tyler got the call at 6:47 p.m. "We found her. She's alive." His knees buckled. They raced to Flagstaff. When they saw her in that hospital bed, tubes everywhere, they couldn't process it. Their baby, Alive.News, exploded. Every network, every station. The girl who survived 5 days in hell. But detectives didn't celebrate, because Madison didn't fall into that pit. She was thrown. Someone tried to murder a 3-year-old child, and that someone was still out there. When Madison spoke, words came in fragments. A truck, blue, a man, mustache, candy. He said he'd take her to daddy, then darkness. Detectives recorded everything, checked DMV records, hundreds of blue trucks, started eliminating them. 3 days later, they found him. Kyle Eugene Porter, 28 years old, lived 9 miles from the West family, drove a dark blue Ford F-150. When deputies arrived before dawn, he was washing his truck. At 4:47 in the morning, with bleach, they got a warrant. Blood on the passenger floor, child's clothing fiber in the seatbelt, candy wrapper, a piece of paper with Madison's name scribbled on it. In the interrogation room, Porter sat calm, too calm, told different stories, changed details. Finally, they showed him the evidence. DNA match, fibers, handwriting. He smiled. "You can't prove what happened. You weren't there." That smile haunted Sheriff Anderson for years. When they showed Madison photos, she pointed without hesitation. "That's him." The trial became national news. Porter's defense fought hard, claimed mistaken identity. Nobody believed it. Evidence was overwhelming. But Porter accepted a plea deal. 18 years with parole after 12. For kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder of a child. The courtroom erupted. 18 years. He'd be out before Madison finished college. Porter walked out of prison in 2012. 14 years served. Good behavior, they said. Free. While Madison learned to live with panic attacks, nightmares, the fear that darkness brings, she could have let it destroy her. But Madison was forged in that pit. She studied psychology, became a therapist specializing in childhood trauma, started a foundation, wrote a book, spoke at conferences, not for fame, but to tell other survivors, "You're not alone. Healing is possible." People ask about forgiveness. She laughs, not bitterly, just honestly. There's no such thing as closure. Trauma doesn't close. You just learn to carry it differently. "He thought he buried me," she told an audience once. "He didn't know I was a seed." And seeds grow in darkness. For most of her life, Madison lived with ghosts. Not the kind that haunt houses, but the kind that wait in corners of her mind. The smell of rot, the sound of dripping water, the feeling of being small in darkness. Sometimes they came without warning, in elevators and bathrooms, when someone stood too close. The body remembers what the mind tries to bury. As a child, she was terrified of darkness, slept with every light on, stuffed rabbit beside her, door always open. At school, she flinched when someone walked behind her. Teachers called it nervousness. Madison knew it was memory wearing the shape of instinct. Through adolescence, nightmares persisted. Only the pit, the blackness, the smell, the waiting. She'd wake drenched in sweat, gasping, hands clenching sheets like ropes. Therapy came early, but for years she treated it like homework. Sessions helped her talk about facts, not feelings. She could say, "I was kidnapped," but couldn't say, "I was afraid." By her late teens, Madison understood the paradox of survival. Everyone wanted her grateful for being alive. Nobody wanted to hear what being alive felt like. Reporters asked about miracles, never about shame or guilt or the burden of being the girl who lived. She tried to outrun it, through school, through relationships that never worked, through years of pretending the past happened to someone else. But trauma doesn't fade. It waits until you decide to face it. That reckoning came in her 20s during a volunteer program for children in crisis. One day a little girl told her, "I feel like no one sees me." The words landed like lightning, because Madison had been that child, unseen, unheard, left in darkness. That day she decided to stop running. She returned to therapy, this time as patient and student, studied psychology, learned the language of trauma, slowly built a bridge between the child she'd been and the woman she wanted to become. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a loop, a constant negotiation between memory and meaning. In her 30s, Madison became a licensed therapist specializing in childhood trauma. Her office was designed for safety: soft chairs, open windows, plants everywhere. No dark corners, no locked doors. Safety isn't just a place, she told clients. It's a feeling we rebuild. Her work caught attention of advocates. She joined forces with survivors, researchers, professionals to co-found the Arizona Foundation to Protect Children, later expanding as the National Coalition to End Child Abuse. As executive director, Madison spoke at universities, hospitals, conferences, legislative hearings. She used her story not for sympathy, but as proof that survival was possible. In interviews, her tone stayed calm, even discussing horrific details. "I don't remember everything," she said during a TED Talk, "but my body does. And that's enough to teach me compassion." In 2021, she published her memoir titled "I Live Here Now," named after words she'd spoken as a child from her hospital bed. Words that once symbolized resignation, but now represented survival. "I used to think those words meant surrender," she wrote, "but now I think they meant something else. Survival. Because I didn't say I die here now, I said I live here now, and somehow I did." The book became a success, passed among survivors and therapists, used in college courses nationwide. Readers described it as both devastating and luminous. Over years, Madison became the voice she once needed. The steady voice telling others they mattered, that pain was real, that healing meant learning to live beside the past without letting it consume everything. When asked what message her work would leave behind, she smiled. "You matter. When you believe you matter, you can do impossible things." Those words became her foundation's motto, but to Madison, they were rebellion against silence that once threatened to define her. She still carries scars, physical ones on her legs, faint but visible, and invisible ones showing up in panic moments. Healing didn't erase scars. It turned them into markers of distance. Every July, she visits mountains north of Prescott Valley. Not the exact site, but close enough. She stands beneath ponderosa pines, closes her eyes, lets silence wash over her. It's no longer frightening. It's hers. She once told a journalist, "The man who hurt me thought he buried me. He didn't know I was a seed." And maybe that's what her story became. Not just survival, but transformation. A child left in darkness who grew into a woman devoted to pulling others out. A voice once small and trembling now carries across auditoriums, reminding others to keep living. Perhaps that was the truest justice Madison ever found. Not in a courtroom, but in the life she built from wreckage. In children she helped. In voices she amplified. In refusing to let 5 days define 50 years. When people ask if she's angry, she pauses. "Of course I wish it hadn't happened, but I can't change what happened. I can only change what I do with it." And that, she believes, is where real power lies. Not in the past, but in the present, which is hers to shape. She continues to work, to write, to speak. She trains therapists in trauma-informed care. She lobbies for stronger child protections. She shows up again and again to tell her story so others don't carry theirs alone. On hardest days, when memories press too close, she remembers something a therapist told her years ago. "You survived the worst day of your life when you were 3. Imagine what you can survive now." So she does. She imagines. She survives. She lives. Not in a pit, not in the past, not in shadow of the man who tried to bury her. She lives in the light she fought to reach, and she refuses to let it go. What happened next in the investigation would reveal just how close evil had come to getting away with it. When investigators returned to the rescue site on July 21st, they photographed everything meticulously. The outhouse structure, weathered and ancient, rope marks on the wooden frame, small handprints on inside walls where she tried to climb, tire tracks on the dirt road nearby, and something that made Deputy Dylan McCarthy stop short. A torn piece of fabric caught on a rusted nail, pink with tiny strawberries, matching Madison's shorts exactly. The pit itself told the rest. She'd been thrown in, not fallen. The angle proved it. The wooden platform was too high, the opening too narrow. Someone had put her there deliberately. The steep walls offered nothing to grip. She'd survived by standing on accumulated debris at the bottom, just high enough to keep her head above the filth, calling for help whenever she heard sounds above. Sheriff Anderson stood at the edge for a long time without speaking. Finally, he whispered, "Whoever did this didn't mean for her to be found. This was supposed to be her grave." Back at the hospital, Madison was stabilizing. Her fever broke. Her breathing steadied. The chemical burns would require months of treatment, multiple skin grafts, physical therapy. But doctors were cautiously optimistic. When child psychiatrist Dr. Rebecca Hughes asked if Madison could remember the man, she shook her head at first. Then, after a long pause, she whispered something that made the nurse's blood run cold. "He said he had candy, red candy in a shiny wrapper. He said he would take me to see Daddy. He said Daddy was waiting just down the street. He seemed nice. He smiled at me." These details, sparse as they were, represented a starting point. Investigators returned to Sagebrush Drive. Several neighbors, when asked specifically about a blue truck, remembered seeing one idling near the corner that day. The description was common in Arizona, but Madison had mentioned a fish sticker on the dashboard. That detail was unusual. Detectives pulled DMV records for every dark blue pickup within 50 miles. Hundreds of vehicles. Teams split the list into zones, quietly checking each owner. Not looking for confessions, just inconsistencies. Nervous behavior, fresh scratches, recent cleaning with bleach. 3 days later, Kyle Eugene Porter's name drew attention. 28, unmarried, living alone in a mobile home 9 miles from the West House. Neighbors described him as odd but polite, worked sporadically, spent hours late at night tinkering with his truck, sometimes washing it at strange hours. He drove a dark blue Ford F-150. When deputies arrived at 4:47 a.m. on July 24th, they found him already outside, washing his truck. With bleach, red flag. They asked to search. He refused. They got a warrant. Crime scene technicians processed the truck. Blood on the passenger floor mat, pink fiber in the seatbelt buckle, candy wrapper. A piece of paper with Madison's name crumpled under the seat. In interrogation, Porter stayed eerily calm. First he said he'd never seen her. Then he'd tried to help her. Then she'd gotten scared. Then he'd driven around looking for her house. Each story contradicted the last. After hours, detectives showed him the evidence. DNA match, fiber analysis, handwriting comparison. Timeline placing his truck near Sagebrush Drive at the exact time. Photographs of the outhouse proving he'd been there. He looked at it all, smiled. "You can't prove what happened." "You weren't there." That line would haunt Anderson for years. Days later, when Madison was strong enough, they showed her photos. A lineup of 6 faces. She studied each carefully, finger hovering, then pointed. "That's him, the man with the mustache." The room went completely still. Sheriff Anderson announced the arrest publicly but avoided details. "We have strong physical evidence. We believe we've identified the man responsible." After Madison's identification, Porter stopped talking entirely, stared at the ceiling, never confessed. Instead asked one question: "Is she alive?" When told yes, his eyes flickered. Not relief, something closer to irritation. Then he turned to the wall, never spoke again. The case moved swiftly. Grand jury indicted Porter on kidnapping, aggravated assault, child abuse, attempted murder. Evidence was overwhelming. But the trial dragged on for months. Defense argued every point. claimed misidentification despite Madison's clear ID, suggested Porter had found her wandering, tried to help. Jury didn't believe it. During testimony, Tyler and Megan sat together in the front row, holding hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. They never spoke, but their presence filled the room. When photographs of the pit were shown, several jurors turned away. One woman wiped tears. Defense tried to shift blame, brought in psychologists, testified about Porter's difficult childhood, but the prosecution reminded them he had thrown a living 3-year-old into a pit and walked away. When Madison testified, the courtroom fell silent. She was 4 years old, small, wearing a blue dress. She walked to the witness stand holding her mother's hand and her stuffed rabbit. When asked if she could recognize the man who took her, she looked around slowly, then stopped, pointed at Porter. "That's him, the man with the mustache. That's the man who took me." Tyler would later say it was the quietest moment of his life. Porter was convicted on all counts, but in a plea deal to avoid death penalty and spare Madison further testimony, he was sentenced to 18 years with parole after 12. To the public, it felt impossibly light. To the family, meaningless. Time couldn't measure what he'd taken. Prescott Valley tried to return to normal, but normal never came back. The forest road was closed, the outhouse torn down, the pit filled with concrete. Parents watched their children differently. Never out of sight, never out of reach. Porter served 14 years, walked out in 2012. Good behavior, they said. Registered as a sex offender in Nevada. Disappeared into supervised anonymity. For the West family, his release reopened every wound. Madison was 17, a high school senior, but old enough to understand what release from prison meant. Her mother tried to shield her, but the information found her anyway. At school, on social media. Tyler said nothing for 3 days, then walked to the garage and destroyed an old workbench with a sledgehammer until his hands bled. Madison remembered the sound more than any words, the rhythm of anger, the echo of something that wouldn't fade. The public called it a failure of justice, but for Madison it became a lesson. Prison walls didn't hold the man who hurt her. They held an idea. That punishment could make her whole. That 14 years could erase 5 days. She never believed in closure. Trauma doesn't close. You just learn to carry it differently. But she did live, studied psychology at Arizona State, became a therapist, helped survivors find language for pain courts couldn't name, started a foundation, wrote a book, spoke at conferences, to tell other survivors one truth: you're not alone. Healing is possible. "I don't think of him anymore," she said once. He had 5 days in that pit, 14 years of silence in a cell. He doesn't get the rest of my life. That belongs to me. Still, every July, memories return. The sound of gravel, the smell of dust, the voice that told her to get in. Some nights she wakes gasping, body remembering what the mind tries to forget. But morning comes. She stands up. That's her victory. People ask what justice means to her. She smiles, not bitterly, but with calm. Justice isn't about what happens to him. It's about what I do with what he left behind. She pauses, looking at the Arizona sun. It's about living. That's the only verdict that matters. In that sense, maybe she won. Not because the law punished him enough, but because she refused to let him define her ending. She took back what he tried to steal. Day by day, choice by choice. She built something beautiful from something horrific. Every person she helps is revenge. Every speech she gives is defiance. Every morning she wakes is victory he can never take. He thought he buried me, she says. He didn't know I was a seed. That's what she became. Proof that survival isn't just possible, it's powerful. A voice for the voiceless. Evidence that darkness doesn't get the final word. On July 20th every year, she drives north, stands under pines, closes her eyes, remembers that little girl who called from the pit, whispers the same thing: "And I found you. You're safe now, we survived." Because that's the only justice that matters. Not what a judge decides. Not how long someone sits in a cell, but what you do with the life they tried to steal. Madison took hers back. The man who hurt her served 14 years. Madison's been serving a life sentence since she was 3. But she's not doing time. She's doing life. Real life. full life Umadam. The kind that proves darkness doesn't get the final word. She does. And her final word? I matter. You matter. We survive. We heal. We live. Not despite the darkness. Because of it. The strongest trees grow in harsh soil. The brightest lights shine in deep dark. And sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that once called for help from a pit bottom. That voice, Edith Madison's now, and it's changing the world. One survivor at a time. One story at a time. One impossible victory at a time. If her story moved you, share it. Not because it's tragic, but because it's proof. Proof you can survive the unsurvivable. Endure the unendurable. Build something meaningful from something meaningless. Because that's what survivors do. They take the worst day of their lives and turn it into their reason for living. Madison did, and so can you. The investigation revealed details that would chill any parent. When forensic teams processed Porter's truck, they found more than just blood and fibers. They found a notebook hidden under the driver's seat, pages filled with dates, PMI locations, streets in Prescott Valley, streets where children played. Madison Street was there, circled, with a date, July 15, 1998. He'd been planning it, watching, waiting for his moment. Detectives discovered Porter had been fired from a landscaping job 2 months earlier. His route had included Sagebrush Drive. He'd mowed lawns there, trimmed hedges, watched families, watched Madison playing in her yard. Nobody had thought twice about the quiet man with the truck full of equipment. The notebook contained other addresses too, other streets, other potential victims. The realization hit investigators like a fist. If Madison hadn't survived, if hikers hadn't found her, Porter would have continued, would have taken another child, and another. Madison's survival had stopped a predator. When Sheriff Anderson held his final press conference, his voice was heavy. Madison Grant saved lives by surviving. Her courage in that pit, her refusal to give up, stopped this man before he could hurt other children. The implications were staggering. How many other children had been on that list? How many had been spared because one 3-year-old girl refused to die? The investigation also revealed Porter's pattern. He'd been arrested twice before, once for loitering near a school, once for following a child in a store, both times released with warnings. The system had failed to recognize a predator in plain sight, failed to connect the dots, failed to stop him before Madison. At trial, prosecutors presented the notebook as evidence of premeditation. The defense tried to dismiss it as fantasy, meaningless scribblings, but combined with everything else, with the physical evidence in Madison's testimony, it painted a clear picture. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was calculated, planned, evil wearing a normal face. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Megan collapsed in Tyler's arms. They'd been holding themselves together for months. Now, finally, they broke. Madison, watching from the witness room, didn't cry. She simply nodded. Justice, incomplete as it was, had been served. But the story didn't end there. Years later, after Porter's release, Madison would learn something that changed her perspective entirely. A letter arrived at her foundation office from a woman in Nevada. I was 13 when Kyle Porter tried to take me in 1995, it read. I screamed. He drove away. I never reported it because I didn't think anyone would believe me. But I've followed your story. Your survival gave me courage to finally speak up. Thank you for being brave enough to live. The letter was one of 7. 7 women who came forward after Madison's story became public. Women who'd encountered Porter before 1998. Women who'd escaped. Women who'd stayed silent. Until Madison showed them they didn't have to. That's when Madison understood. Her survival had done more than stop Porter from taking other children. It had given voice to the ones he'd already tried to take, had validated their trauma, had proved they weren't crazy, weren't making it up, weren't alone. She keeps those letters in her office, reads them when the nightmares get bad, when the anniversary hits hard, when doubt creeps in. They remind her why she speaks, why she shares her story despite the pain, why she refuses to be silent. Because silence protects predators. Silence lets them hunt. Silence tells victims they don't matter. And Madison refuses to be silent. Every speech she gives, every interview she does, every survivor she helps, it's all defiance. It's all resistance. It's all refusal to let darkness win. In 2019, Madison testified before the Arizona State Legislature, advocated for stronger laws protecting children, for better background checks, for harsher penalties for repeat offenders, for survivor support services. Her testimony was passionate, personal, powerful. "I was 3 years old when Kyle Porter decided my life didn't matter," she told the legislators. "I survived because strangers heard me calling from a pit. But I'm still here, still fighting, because I refuse to believe that monsters like him get the final say. We do. We survivors. We get to decide what our lives become. And I've decided mine will count for something." The legislation passed unanimously. It was named Madison's Law, requiring stricter monitoring of registered sex offenders, mandatory reporting of suspicious behavior around children, increased funding for victim services. It wasn't everything, but it was something real, something that might save another child. Standing in the Capitol Rotunda after the vote, Madison felt something shift inside her. Not suddenly, not like a switch flipping, but like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Slow, inevitable, irreversible. For years, she'd been running from that pit, running from the memory of darkness pressing in from all sides, running from the smell that still woke her gasping some nights, running from the fear that had shaped every decision she'd made since she was 3 years old. Every locked door, every checked shadow, every panicked breath in an elevator, all of it running. But that day, standing in the marble rotunda with sunlight streaming through windows 30 feet high, surrounded by legislators who just voted unanimously to protect children because of her story, because of her pain, because of her voice, she stopped running. She turned around, faced it, really faced it for the first time in decades. The pit was still there, would always be there. She understood that now. You don't survive something like that and come out unchanged. You don't spend 5 days calling for help in the dark and wake up one day completely healed. That's not how trauma works. That's not how survival works. The pit had become part of her architecture, part of the foundation on which everything else was built. But standing there watching the legislators shake her hand and thank her, watching her mother cry tears that were finally joy instead of grief, watching her father stand taller than he had in years, she realized something profound. The pit was part of her story, yes, a chapter, a terrible, horrific, defining chapter. But not the whole story, not even the most important part anymore. The most important part was what came after. Not what happened to her in that moment of horror, but what she did with every moment that followed. The choice to survive when survival seemed impossible. The decision to heal when healing seemed pointless. The commitment to help others when she could barely help herself. That was the story. That was what mattered. She thought about the 7-year-old Madison learning to sleep with lights on, the 12-year-old Madison flinching when boys at school got too close, the 16-year-old Madison learning that the man who hurt her was free while she was still imprisoned by nightmares, the 20-year-old Madison sitting in her first college psychology class and realizing she could study this, could understand this, could maybe even master this. Every version of herself had been fighting to get to this moment of standing in a building where laws were made, where change happened, where one person's pain could become protection for thousands of children she'd never meet. That's what she tells survivors now when they come to her foundation, when they sit across from her in that carefully designed office with no dark corners. She looks them in the eye and speaks truth they desperately need to hear. "Your trauma is real," she begins, and she means it. Every syllable carries the weight of someone who knows. Nobody gets to minimize it. Nobody gets to tell you it wasn't that bad, or you should be over it by now, or you're being dramatic. What happened to you was real. It changed you. It marked you. And that's valid. She pauses, lets that sink in, watches their shoulders drop slightly as permission to hurt washes over them. "Your pain is valid," she continues. "Every nightmare, every panic attack, every moment you can't breathe because something reminded you of that day. Every time you check the locks twice or avoid certain places or can't trust like you used to. That's all real. That's all legitimate. You're not broken for feeling it. Another pause, longer this time. Your fear is justified. Of course you're afraid. Of course you see danger where others see normalcy. Your brain is trying to protect you. It learned that the world isn't safe, that people can't be trusted, that terrible things happen in broad daylight. That lesson was beaten into you, and your fear is just trying to keep you alive. Don't let anyone tell you that fear is weakness. It's not. It's proof you survived. She leans forward then. This is where the shift happens, where she moves from validation to empowerment. But you are more than what happened to you. You are more than your worst day. You are more than your trauma. You are more than what someone did to you when you couldn't defend yourself. That moment, that hour, that day, it doesn't get to be your whole story. It doesn't get to write your ending. She lets silence fill the space, lets them absorb it. You are what you do next. You are the choice you make tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off and the nightmares are still fresh. Do you pull the covers over your head or do you put your feet on the floor? You are that choice. You are what you choose to become when everything inside you is screaming to give up. You are how you decide to live when living feels impossible. It's not easy advice. Madison knows that better than anyone. She lives it every single day. Some days are harder than others. Some days the pit feels closer than others, like she could reach out and touch those slick walls, smell that chemical stench, hear her own 3-year-old voice calling desperately into darkness. Some days she can barely get out of bed, can barely shower, can barely face the mirror without seeing that terrified child looking back at her. But she does. She gets up, she showers, she faces that mirror. Because that's the choice. That's always the choice. Get up or stay down. Live or merely exist. Fight or surrender. And Madison chose a long time ago which side she was on. And Madison fights, not against the past anymore. She learned years ago that battle couldn't be won. The past is fixed, immutable, unchangeable. She can't go back and prevent what happened. Can't warn her 3-year-old self not to trust the man with candy. Can't stop her father from going inside for that popsicle. Can't undo 5 days in darkness. But she can fight for the future, for other Madisons, for other 3-year-olds who might cross paths with monsters wearing normal faces and driving ordinary trucks. For a world where children can play in their yards without parents' hearts stopping every time they look away for 90 seconds. For a system that actually protects the vulnerable instead of failing them repeatedly until tragedy strikes. That's justice, real justice. Not what happened to Kyle Porter, not the sentence he served or the supervised release he now lives under, not the registry he's on or the restrictions he faces. All of that is procedure, process, system, but it's not justice, not really. Justice is what Madison does every single day. The life she lives in defiance of what he tried to do. The work she does helping others reclaim their stories. The hope she spreads to people who thought hope was dead. That's the verdict that matters. That's the sentence that counts. That's the justice Porter can never escape no matter where he goes or how long he lives. Because he took 5 days from her, took her innocence, took her sense of safety, took her trust in humanity, took pieces of her that can never be fully restored. But she's spent years, decades now, taking meaning from that darkness, taking purpose from that pain, taking power from that pit. He threw her in intending her to die. She climbed out and built a ladder for others to use. He tried to silence her forever, to make sure nobody ever heard her voice again. She became the loudest voice in the room, the voice legislators listen to, the voice that changes laws and saves lives. He wanted her erased. She made herself unforgettable. That's not just survival. That's not just getting through. That's not just managing to keep breathing and call it living. That's victory. That's triumph. That's transformation in its purest form. From victim to survivor to advocate to healer. From the bottom of a pit 15 feet deep to stages and courtrooms and legislative chambers where decisions are made and history is written. From a 3-year-old crying for help that wouldn't come for 5 days to a woman people cry out to for help they can't find anywhere else. She's become what she needed, what she wished for in that pit, what she prayed for in the hospital, what she searched for through years of therapy and nightmares and learning to live again. She's become the proof that it's possible, the evidence that darkness doesn't win, the testimony that survival is more than just existing. And every time she speaks, every time she shares her story, every time she looks a survivor in the eye and says, "I know, I understand, I've been there," she's hammering another nail in the coffin of everything Porter tried to do to her. She's proving that evil doesn't get the final word, that monsters don't win, that light is stronger than darkness, even when darkness seems overwhelming. Some people call her brave. She doesn't feel brave. Brave is running into burning buildings or standing up to armed attackers. She's just doing what she has to do to live with herself, to look in the mirror and not see a victim staring back, to sleep at night knowing she did something with her pain instead of just carrying it in silence. Some people call her inspirational. She finds that word uncomfortable. She's not trying to inspire anyone. She's just trying to survive. And if her survival helps others survive too, then maybe, just maybe, those 5 days in hell serve some purpose beyond torture. Maybe they became the fire that forged something stronger than what existed before. If this story moved you, if Madison's courage reminds you that survival is possible, even in the darkest places, even when you're 3 years old and alone and terrified and nobody can hear you calling, then share it. Share it widely. Share it loudly. Share it with the person who needs to hear it most. Let others know they're not alone in their darkness, that someone else has walked this path, that someone else knows what it feels like to be broken and still choose to get up every morning.